Hi everyone, welcome to another DBmaestro Academy webinar. On today's session, we'll talk about finance institutes and the enforcement of DevOps and organizational policy. On today's session, we'll talk about DevOps, but first I want to make sure that you can all hear me. Well, I'm talking now, so if you can't hear me, please check your audio settings. We have a chat box in the GoToWebinar control panel. So if you have a problem, please try logging off and logging in, and I hope that you can hear us. Anyway, during the webinar, you can put in questions in the Q&A session, in the Q&A section, and I'll be visiting these questions at the end of the webinar. A recording of this webinar would be shared with you. So I know people usually ask if it's going to be sent. So yes. And if you missed this webinar, you're going to get this as well. So with no further ado, my name is Yaniv Yehuda. I'm the co-founder and CTO of DBmaestro. And on today's session, I'll be talking about challenges that we encounter mainly in financial institutes while adopting DevOps in general, automation, and specifics about database challenges. I'll be talking about best practices of speeding up time to market. And I would be talking a lot about safety nets and the processes and actions that you can take in order to be able to move fast without risking yourself, without causing downtime, and making sure that you implement everything that you can in order to work efficiently. So a bit of a background. Let's start from statistics. So you might have encountered this time and time again. DevOps is not a hype anymore. DevOps is a reality. So that means that most organizations today are either implementing several projects, or even more than that. Some of them are implementing all of the projects with DevOps processes. That ranges from implementing automation, implementing CI processes, implementing CD, and some do continuous delivery, some do continuous deployment. But if you look at the graphs on the screen, what's actually interesting is what at the beginning was counterintuitive to me. I thought SMBs would be able to run faster, so be more efficient and agile, and maybe go with DevOps quicker than enterprises. But what we found out, and after a lot of conversations, we realized that actually enterprises have to move faster, and this is because of very interesting reasons. So first of all, the competition is fierce. And moving fast is always something that you need to do. But for enterprises, there's a lot of problems with, let's call it, the ability to deliver changes, but deliver them consistently. So it's not just to be able to deliver changes, but the ability to do it once and once again, and make sure that for the 100th time, you're still doing it again, but there's a lot of people involved. So it's not just trying to move faster and trying to be agile, it's trying to be consistent. And that consistency is something that can create a lot of order, which is very important if you have a lot of moving pieces, a lot of people in a process, okay? So that is just a few of the reasons that we uncovered when talking to enterprises. By the way, I'll be showing today a lot of figures and statistics. Some of them are from public available reports, some of them from our own reports, and you could get these reports and surveys if you want. I'll offer them towards the end of the webinar. So let's talk about moving faster. So as I mentioned, enterprise are moving to agile, and the dramatic increase of frequency and capacity of releases is driving everything faster. It's not just about moving faster, it's about moving faster again and again and increasing that frequency. So when we talk to companies who used to do a release a few times a month, now they're talking about doing these releases a few times a week. Or the ones who are doing a few times a week now are doing a few times a day. And the percentage are always going forward. So if in 2017 we saw 14% of the companies doing daily releases, it jumped to 24 on 2018. So this is something that is a clear motivator for companies to deliver. They need to be able to compete and be attractive. They need to move on faster to be better on time to market. And we see less and less companies that can afford like the old waterfall kind of a release every 6 months or a year. So this is becoming like the infrequent model. Implementing DevOps is not just implementing one thing. Implementing DevOps is about culture. So helping organizations increase their connectivity. It's connecting the different silos in the organization, and also, of course, delivering tools that are not DevOps themselves, but are supportive in that process. So you can implement DevOps and do it with no tools, but if you implement tools that will help you, like planning tools, communication tools, automation tools, ticketing systems, deployment tools, version control tools that might be more modern than what you're using, you're in a position to build a tool chain. And that tool chain, if built correctly, if built according to best practices, would be the conveyor belt that can help you accelerate and can help you be more repeatable, so you make less mistakes. And if you make less mistakes and you can move faster, then you're more efficient and you can move faster yet again. So it's a self-improving process, because the more you automate, the easier it becomes to do more stuff and to improve the automation and to do more stuff. So you can understand why DevOps and the tooling involved is the hype it is in the last few years. But when we consider everything that I said and talk about the database, we don't see the database acting up to these numbers. So it's not even in the vicinity of 70 or 80+%. It's much less. It's 30-something%. And this is something that we got in our surveys, but when we actually dug in and asked more questions, we found out that these are usually maybe the easier cases. So databases are a challenge. And when we try to talk to customers and prospects and other vendors and realize why is this a problem for them, we found out a lot of what you can see on the screen. So, there's multi-vendors DB. There's Oracle and Postgres and Microsoft SQL and Cassandra and Mongo, each one with its own technology. Okay, that's a problem, but it's also higher risk than application code. If you have a release for your application code and you're using the right tool, maybe a binary repository, maybe a way to do a controlled rollout, then you, in many cases, can also roll back very easily. So something is wrong with the release. Rolling back could be a matter of a decision and a few seconds to roll out that previous version, because that one has a major thing in it. But when you talk about the database, sometimes changes are either irreversible or very hard to reverse. So there's a challenge here. If you drop a table, which is of course one of the catastrophic use cases that you could do, then you're in a big problem. You needed to prevent that. recovering from a dropped database is maybe one of the most problematic issues, because even if you have backups, you lost all of your recent data. So that's a problem you're not supposed to try and solve. That's a problem you're supposed to try and prevent. So risk is involved. You need people who know everything about the database. You need DBAs, but DBAs, as we would see in a minute, are not always part of the modern processes, and we need to change that. We need to change the way that databases are based on a lot of manual work instead of automation tools. So taking all of these risks and talking about compliance needs and security needs and the processes which are inherently different than application, because when you do a rollout for your next website, at the end of the day, you copy web files. You copy either dynamically or static web files that end at the web server. If you want to deploy another version, you just copy different files on top of the previous ones. You cannot do this for the database. Database is a stateful container. That means that you cannot copy something on top of it. You cannot take QA and copy it over pre-production, and you cannot take pre-production and copy it over production, because you would lose your customer's data. So all you can do is transition an existing database to its new form or its new release, and support that it's supported that way. So the whole process is different for database than for application. And now you're trying to combine what I said on the previous slide. Everybody's moving faster, and application releases are flying forward, and everybody's accelerating. Yet for the database, we have, in many cases, not a lot of solutions to support us, manual processes, a lot of risk. So moving faster is just stressing everybody up. So DBAs, they need to deal with that. Okay, there's a lot of requirement for them. Do this, do that as well, and they start like running and trying to deal with everything, but it's not easy. So moving fast is requiring us to deal with control, with track, with auditing, and managing the risk to the database. And this is becoming a challenge that is usually something that we see in, let's call it, day 2. So day 1, you would implement maybe your application. That is at least what we see in most organizations. You implement your code development processes, your CI processes, then you do CD. Then you start accelerating, only to find out that you're limited by the slowest component in your application. So if you're moving very fast for your application, but for every maybe 2 or 3 releases for your code, you need to do a database change, then you need to wait for that database change to happen. So as efficient as you might get on your application side, if you're not moving efficiently on the database side, you would be limited altogether. Just for example, one of our customers had 1,000 releases per month for its application side, and just 6 for the database. So the gap is pretty large here. So this is the kind of problem we need to think about solving. What are the problems for solving it? So if you look at the graph on the right, let's discuss who has access to actually make changes to the database. 2/3 of the companies report that DBAs do that. Okay, only DBAs. So about 40% say it's application and or dev team, and 20% say, sorry, 20% say it's application and dev team, and 20% it's the DevOps team, as would probably be larger and larger each passing year. But if you just think about it, the number games is not playing in favor of most of the organizations here, because if DBAs are the ones promoting changes and doing updates to the database, and everybody is accelerating, then the load on these DBAs is getting larger and larger. And if you look at the graph on the right, I think this is the result. So we try to correlate in our surveys between the frequency of database updates versus the amount of people focused on these database updates versus the number of failures or database crashes. And what you can see quite clearly in the green bar on the left over here is actually, if you have a release once a year, you don't experience these much crashes. Like the joke about if it ain't broken, don't fix it. So if you don't change anything, the risk for a failure is low. But of course, that is counter everything that we're doing on like the business level. We're trying to move faster and be competitive. So we need to make changes. We need to improve. We need to ship out more features and be more competitive. But the faster we're going, if we're not using the right processes, then the more failures we have. And people having daily releases are reporting almost a third of the changes at some point resulting in failures. And this is, of course, something that is very, very challenging and very stressing to each organization, but can be catastrophic if these changes are going out of like the lower environment. So if you have a challenge in your development environment, that's time of a developer. If you have a challenge in your integration environment, that might be the time of your development team. QA, that might be your QA team. But if you have a problem in production, that could be very costly. I think I remember Gartner reporting this to be hundreds of thousands of dollars per an hour of downtime at the enterprise level. So this can be very costly, not to talk about the market and how it would react to such problems. So we do need to move fast, but we need to move fast and not break the database. So how do we do it? Let's figure out what's happening today. So again, this is from our most recent survey. This is running at the moment. I'll share with anybody who wants to contribute and participate. I'll share these links at the end. So we found out that DBAs are spending 33% of their time just delivering changes. If you just consider everything that I said, this is time wasted. If you automate the introduction of changes, they could spend every minute of their time doing optimization, doing backups and recovery, doing installation and upgrades, and dealing with security. So database changes by itself has no value. It's something that you need to do in order to deliver the database progress and the application progress forward. Optimization and performance and other things, that has more value for the DBA to deal with. So while they're investing a lot of time doing so, they're also having a lot of challenges. Okay, so you have an ever-increasing frequency of changes hitting a small group of people who have to work in too many cases manually, and then you end up with this. And this is hundreds of people's quotes about what is the reasons for failure in their database releases. Configuration drift between environments. The developer is creating code. It works perfectly. It's tested on integration. It's tested on QA. It's tested on pre-production. You go to production and you fail because you hit a hotfix that was introduced there. And that change is suddenly breaking your previous fix or failing altogether because there's a hard conflict between the two changes. 75% of the surveyed people say this is the #1 problem that they have. Conflict between teams. A team is deploying one feature, another team is deploying another feature, and they conflict and they don't even know about it till something fails later on. And again, the later you find problems, the more money and time is lost. You don't want to find about these things at the end. You want to find about it as soon as possible. Accidental overrides. People overriding each other's code because you don't have proper code source control like you have for your application, for your Git, for your whatever. If you go to the database and change a procedure, and another person goes in and overrides it, nobody would even know that code was lost. You need to solve these things. Undocumented hot fixes, of course. I just mentioned this as a root cause for drift problems. If to save the day, the DBA would come up at 4 a.m. and fix something so the next day can work, and then he goes home to sleep, and then that next release a week later just overrides his fix, we're in square one again. So obviously there's a lot of challenges that we need to solve. This is again from our recent survey. We'll be more than happy to get your point of view, what you find out to be challenging for you, and we would be publishing this as pretty soon. So would be very happy to get your point of view as well. So critical errors, data loss, costly downtime. This is something that we need to prevent. So just to figure what we just said. So being a DBA is super easy. Okay, it's like riding a bike, except the bike is on fire, you're on fire, everything is on fire, and you're in hell. This is a DBA joke, but this is true. This is funny, but super true. So what can we do? What can we do if on the survey everybody's saying, yeah, on 2019 we're going to accelerate yet more? For the database, 64% of the surveyed organizations said they're planning to deploy on daily basis. 64% more than in 2018. So everybody is accelerating to like the highest speed. Who's going to do this? Okay, DBAs are ninjas. So this shirt I actually took from the Ninja DBAs.co.uk. This is a real website, and they say, you know, being a ninja is not a job description, but this is actually what they have to deal with. And just consider 22% of the surveyed people said that they're doing changes manually, copying scripts and posting them on the right server. This is super dangerous. Okay, it's not repeatable at all. So what's going to happen? I'm not sure how they're going to deal with that 64%, unless we're going to go back to the previous slide and talk about the risk of failure. So you know what's going to hit the fan. So what do we do? So how do we move faster without breaking the database? And there's a scripted way to do so. So if you reflect to what happened, what was happening years ago, and what in many organizations is still a process, you have to do things very carefully. But the luxury of moving slow is not there anymore. So like, if you would look at the process like this 10 years ago, maybe the DBA would be the only one introducing changes. A developer would send the code to the DBA. The DBA would read it, say, well, this is not good, this is good, fix it, fix that. Gets the script for the second or third time. He's happy with it. Then he looks at the database and sees if everything is intact, implements the change, tests the database again to see that it's working, and then he goes home. This is completely unsupported in a modern agile or CI/CD process. The frequency is high. This happens dozens of times a week. This happens several times a day. This happens simultaneously with different changes at the same time from different teams. It's not a repeatable process. It's not a scalable process. So what can we do? So first of all, we need to work according to best practices. Things like the basic building blocks of DevOps. How do you do a release? Where do you do your build? Like building just in one place, building once and deploying the same thing to all the different environment in the same way. So there's best practices for the process itself. You should do for the database exactly what's done for the application side of things. You must create a repeatable process. I had the opportunity to talk to people who said, I don't have a problem. I do it manually. I always did it manually. I don't do mistakes. I know this like inside out, okay? But the day you would be sick, the day you would need to move faster than physically you can, then what does the organization do? what's the organization going to do if he's dependent on someone who does something because he knows it? Where's the scalability? If that person is ill for 2 weeks, what do? Do you stop releasing? So you need to create a repeatable process that is repeatable not by just one person, but repeatable per se, repeatable for real. We must introduce balance to workload. This cannot be the job of one person or a small team. As ninja as they might be, this is not something that the DBA team could hold forever. Okay, just it's a numbers game. Even the largest team I ever saw of DBA, it was something like 40 DBAs, but they had to deal with changes coming from roughly 1,000 developers. So the numbers games is always going to be unbalanced. So we need to change that thing. We need to be able to push work and let developers do their part, take their load, but do that safely in a way that is controlled. So, if you talk to a DBA and he says, I cannot give a developer the ability to make changes in the database, he would break my database. And every DBA, even if he doesn't say that, he would fear that that might be the case. Okay, because we all know, I said before, it's risky. If a developer would write something in his deployment script and that would break your production, it's the DBA's role to make sense out of it, to try to revert that, to try to solve it, and not always it's possible. So of course they're protected, but we need to change that balance again. Okay, so we need to put security policies as part of the process itself. It's not something that can be bolted on at the end. If you try to bolt security at the end, you're going to lose a lot of time because you're going to do the whole process, find out that something is not secured, and restart it. You lost a lot of time. It's all about having a very short feedback loop, a very agile process where you consider everything in the beginning. Just like you would not do a big job or a big project without getting feedback, the same thing applies to security. You need to check that at the earliest point. You need to get feedback, if it's from other developers, if that's from maybe a user that would do acceptance tests or design review or anything. The same thing for security. You need to control who's authorized to introduce changes. So it cannot be 60-something% only DBAs, because it's overwhelming and it's not efficient. You need to control what changes are being done. So the moment someone pushes a change that would potentially introduce a risk, or even if it's not a risk, is just not according to company policies, that should be controlled. That should be spotted and regulated. But it cannot wait for a manual review, which is what's happening in most cases, because the higher the capacity and the frequency, the less that review is practical. If you have one change per a period of time, of course, you can look at the code, you can look at the changes, realize if it's good or not. If you have a lot of changes, then you're going to look at things statistically. And if you're looking at things statistically, that means that you're not looking at everything. And by pure Murphy law, you're going to miss that potential risk that's going to sneak, hopefully not all the way to production. Then, of course, you need to do a lot of testing. Okay, test and test and test again till you do it for real. I have a friend who is a great technical guy, like not software, but more physical stuff. And he says always measure, 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 and then cut. Okay, because once you do it for real, there's no way back. Okay, so you need to test and test and test till you do it for real. And of course, expect the unexpected. How? This is all about the expertise that people could put in. How do I look at the potential risks? How do I look at potential pitfalls? What can I build into the process to prevent problems from happening? Documenting everything is a critical thing as well. So sometimes, you're talking to financial organizations, they say, well, I need to comply anyway, so I needed an audit report. But it's not for the audit report. It's not for the audit. If you have a good process that is properly documented, then you can use it for troubleshooting. Something went wrong in QA, you have information about it. You know how to spot it. You know who introduced the change. You know at what part it happened. You know what was the result. So the more information you have, the more efficient your process, not just for compliance per se, which is a good reason by itself. So this is like an overview of the process that should be implemented. Now, how can DBmaestro help you achieve safe DevOps for the database? This is, of course, part of the reasons that we're asking all of these questions. We constantly strive to find what are the pitfalls and how to create technology that would help you evade this. So DBmaestro is all about helping you offer that DevOps edge implemented for the database. So that means moving fast, and there's a saying, moving fast and breaking things. Sure, yeah, you can move fast and break things as long as it's not like unbreakable or unbreakable. That means that if you break something that you shouldn't break, recovery is super hard. If you break something in a controlled manner, you can learn from the process. So you want to move fast and ship with quality rather than break stuff and figure out how to fix it. DBmaestro offers you version control, release automation, security, governance, monitoring, and monitoring for the process, not for the database itself, not for performance. And it caters for Oracle, Microsoft SQL, DB2, Postgres, MySQL, and Mongo are coming soon. So expect that to be shared pretty soon. But let's try to figure out what do we actually do here. So first of all, I mentioned best practices. One of the most important things is to be able to build once and deploy many. That means that you have a repeatable process. If your process is not repeatable, then you end up not having an efficient release process. And I'll try to be more clear about this. Let's say that you have a change that you tested in development, and you decide to push it to your integration environment, and it works perfectly. But when you push it to QA, you find out that something is not acting up as it should, because in QA you have more data and maybe it doesn't scale as you thought. Maybe the query returns things that you didn't think about because more use cases, more data. And you fix it. If you fix it in QA and then push it to production, that means that the rollout itself is tested for real only on the move to production. That's practically an untested release process. This is something that is counter, let's call it unpracticed. This is something that you shouldn't do. But yet, this is the most common thing that we see on companies that we talk to. You ship out changes, it's broken, you fix it, you ship it to the next environment, it's broken, you ship it to the next environment, but you don't have a repeatable process. A repeatable process means that you're shipping it. If it's good, it's good. If it's bad, you throw it away and restart the process. So it goes through the entire release process. That means that if you get to production, you had at least 3 or 4 repeatable releases that went out successfully. This is a tested release process. And it needs to go out exactly the same way to all environments. If you ship changes to integration in one way, to QA in another, and to production in a third way, nothing is guaranteed. If you ship it exactly the same way to QA, to pre-production, to production, then you have a tested process. Immutable packages is all about completing that process, making sure that if you do ship something, it's the same thing that you started with, and someone didn't change something midway, and now you think you have the same thing, but you're actually deploying something different, which is, of course, again, untested. So while doing the obvious automation, we need to cater a lot for risk management. I mentioned a couple of times the risk about doing database releases and managing that risk. And I did mention expecting the unexpected. So let's see how we can do that. So first of all, A lot of this information about best practices, about build once, deploy many, immutability, etc., is available in a white paper. In the end, I'll ask who wants to get it, and we'd be happy to share that with you. And about managing risk, I think looking back to the things people mentioned, and we fine-tuned our solution to help deal with that. So one of the biggest problems, as reported, 75% of the people reported that they have inconsistencies between environments, so drift. This is presumably an unexpected configuration drift, but actually you can know about it, okay? If your production is not what you expected it to be, yet you manage a configuration point of view to what should be there, then you can know that it's drifting. This is something that DBmaestro can provide out of the box, okay? So you start your release process, you go to integration environment, you test something there, you deploy it all the way to production, and someone makes a change and changes it. This is something that you should find out about. This is something that should be reported to you. If that's by a morning email saying, listen, at the nighttime, someone changed that database, please deal with that. Dealing with that could be easy, you know, merging it back to development, retesting it. Why was it changed directly to production? Why was the reason to do so? The DBA went home at 5 a.m. after he fixed whatever was broken, but the process needs to be better. You need to now maybe take it back to testing to realize if that test was perfect and just deal with it. So the information is critical. And DBmaestro could report that to you very easily and like glare at your face saying, you need to deal with that. This is a CD kind of a perspective, but also for CI, you want to make sure that developers who write code don't break the environment. So if they break their own like development environment, that's not nice. That's unproductive, but that's part of the job. You know, you try, you test. That's part of development. If you break your integration environment, you might have a team or maybe a large team who waits for something to be fixed. That could be more costly, because if you have 20 people waiting for an hour to someone to do to take the database out of a backup, that's 20 hours lost. That's a lot of money already. Okay, if it's happening on higher environments, you know, the price goes up and up and up. So catching code before it breaks your database is critical. DBmaestro can offer this as a CI process. So as soon as the developer says, well, I'm done, tags the ticket or something, or specify the right annotation that he's done with that feature could be auto-tested versus a copy of your database well before the release is planned. Maybe it's due in 3 days. Maybe it's due in a week. Maybe it's due this afternoon. If you can test it now, you're now in a much better place. So this is how you can prevent errors and make sure you're more effective. I did mention a lot the tension between DBAs, like trying to make the database as safe as possible, versus developers who at the end of the day need to provide their changes, need to run fast. So how can we balance this? How can we share the load? We can do that by two things. First of all, making sure that you don't need to do manual reviews. So if the code can be tested against organizational policies that would say, dear developer, you try to drop a table. We don't do this here. This is blocked. It's much better than letting him run it on the integration environment, break that for the 20 developers, and now wait for the backup to revive that table, because the data there was critical. Hopefully you have backups for low environments. That's not always the case. So flushing out potential data losses, but also flushing out security cases. You're doing irregular grunts. You know, it's too wide, it's too deep. Your code is insecure because it can be hacked in real time, can be spoofed or injected. These are things that you need to find out about as soon as possible. If it can be flushed minutes after the developer said, I'm done, he's going to be more efficient about fixing it. If he's gonna learn about it a week later, when it fails in maybe pre-production or QA, you need to phase out from whatever he's doing. You need to phase in, fix it, phase out. It's not efficient. Okay, it's counterproductive and it's risky. Okay, so policies help us manage that problem from two ends: making the developer more efficient, making the DBA more efficient because he doesn't need to statistically review or read everything that is there, and it's not really doable. And in many cases, we see people taking these policies, starting from like the dozens policy that we offer out of the box, but adding their own. Like in our bank, nobody should do any updates to the general ledger tables. Okay, any change, whatever, that would remotely touch these tables would trigger a warning and then an error, and then it would block. Okay, so this is an example of how policies can help you enforce the process and prevents errors well before it can create real harm. And the other side of this is balancing work. So this is an example I particularly like, because one of the banks we were working with, they had a process where it's a global organization, and they had developers in the US and in Europe and in India. And in order to control that safety and like reliability of the database, the DBA is the one introducing changes. So people would file up Jira tickets to ask him to do stuff because they would not get access to the database, so they cannot create damage. So the DBA would have lists and lists of tickets asking him to add a table, to add a column, to remove something, to fix it, and to fix it again. Because let's face it, we're not writing code perfectly in the first time. Sometimes we have bugs. That's part of what we do, and we need to fix it, and we need to fine tune it, and we need to change it once again. So by using DBmaestro, they were able to create a very simple process. They said, well, developers would get access to the release process as long as we know they could only deploy just to the integration environment, just once, just one environment. So not to QA, not to UAT, not to pre-prod, of course, not to production. But what that has changed is that instead of waiting 3 days in average for a Jira ticket to be completed, they ended up having developers doing 5 to 10 changes a day to stabilize their release. Okay, so a developer was empowered to push changes, to test, to experiment, to be more efficient, and to not wait for anybody else. But doing so only within the boundaries of what his role permitted. So this is an example of roles and separation of duties. Of course, taking it forward could be the role of a DevOps person. In some cases, it would be the DBA, and then maybe an automated process, because you don't want anybody to physically log into production. So there's a lot of ways to deal with that as well. And of course, I did mention the need to have detailed documentation of everything that happens. So who did what, when, and why is super important. We have a customer who's using this to solve his SOX problem. We have another customer who uses this to troubleshoot. Because if you know that you have a problem, your performance indicator says that you are having a downgrade in responsibility at a certain point, and you know you had a release, and you can trace it back to the specific table, and you can trace the specific table to a specific change and the Jira ticket associated with it, and the person who made the change, then you have full traceability, not just for documentation, but for efficiency of your processes. So this is highly advisable. At the end, being able to zoom out and just figure out what's happening, okay? Look at DevOps, most popular scorecards. So what's the rate of my deployments? What's the rate of my failures? What's the failure rates? What's my lead time? How much time does it take me to actually deliver changes from the moment I initiate them to production. Once you can actually measure this, you'd be amazed how much information would pop up and be readable as knowledge. So you might find out that the team you thought is very efficient because they're pushing a lot of changes out also have a very maybe high frequency of failures. So something might be broken in the process. It's not always speed, it's the ratio between the frequency and the value or the end result. So if you measure it, you can improve it. So talking about DBmaestro, of course, DBmaestro is not a standalone solution. It can serve you if you want it that way. So it can stand alone, but it really shines where you plug it into a DevOps ecosystem and a tool chain. So a lot of our customers have either Jenkins, like 70% of the market has Jenkins and uses it as a CI tool, and base their release processes based on it, and maybe Zebia Labs or IBM Urban Code and Azure pipelines, but they plug changes into ServiceNow and Jira, and they store the passwords in CyberArk and create virtual database with Actifio or Delphix. So the process itself is a highly tuned process, and DBmaestro can plug into that process and really shine because it would cater for the database and the risk management for it and let you run at the rate of your fastest frequency rather than the slowest one. I wanted to share with you some materials. As I mentioned in the beginning, we have some surveys, like the 2018 survey that I've shared results from. We are running the 2019 survey. So if you want to participate, we would be very happy that you do. And we also can provide you white papers about modernizing your processes. So getting more detailed on the things that I was talking about today, and things like discussing build once, deploy many, and more. So with your permission, I'll launch the poll. Please tell me if you want anything out of this. Of course, if you don't, that's just fine. If you want the survey, to participate in the new survey, to get one of the webinar, the white papers. If you want us to be in contact with you, that's also great. And please do fill up the form. I see people started filling it up, so we'll give you some time to do so. I see more people want to see the 2018 surveys than participate in the 2019 survey. I can tell you that it's not a long one. It's 20 questions. So I do urge you to take part of the new survey. I'll give you a few more seconds to say what you want, and then I'll close. I see people are still choosing. Okay. So closing the poll now. Thank you so much for telling us what you want.